There have been countless important battles throughout British history, from the Battle of Hastings in the 11th century to the Battle of Britain during World War II. These bloody conflicts have come to shape Britain into what it is today. Before we get into the video, I just want to say that this list is merely my personal opinion and should not be taken as gospel, as I'm not a historian, just an Aussie guy who loves history. But anyways, without further ado, let's get into the 5 most important battles in British history. Our first inclusion on this list, the Battle of Bosworth Field, took place on the 22nd of August 1485, and marked not only the end of the Wars of the Roses, but also the end of the Plantagenet dynasty, which had ruled England for over 300 years. This battle was fought between the Lancastrian Henry Tudor and the ruling Yorkist Richard III, who acquired the throne via pretty shady methods, but that is a story for another time. When this crucial battle eventually came, it initially looked good for Richard and the Yorkist army. However, due to the inaction and treason of one of Richard's commanders, the Earl of Northumberland, the tide of the battle turned decisively in the Lancastrians' favour. Seeing the jaws beginning to shut, Richard famously proclaimed, "I will die King of England, I will not budge a foot, treason, treason, treason," before leading a bold charge in the aims of cutting down Henry Tudor and ending the battle. All accounts note that Richard fought bravely and ably during this charge, despite having severe scoliosis, unhorsing Sir John Chain, a well-known jousting champion, killing Henry's standard-bearer, Sir William Brandon, and even coming within a sword's length of Henry himself, before being unhorsed and surrounded by Sir William Stanley's men and killed. The new king's own official historian later recorded that King Richard alone was killed fighting manfully in the thickest press of his enemies. The death of Richard III at the Battle of Bosworth Field not only makes him the last English king to die in battle, but also marks the end of the Wars of the Roses and the end of the once dominant Plantagenet dynasty, securing its spot on this list. "70 years before the Battle of Bosworth Field, the Battle of Agincourt, which would go on to form an integral part of English and Welsh national identity, as well as cement the superiority and importance of English and Welsh longbowmen, took place. After several decades of relative peace during a period which would come to be known as the 100 Years' War, England, under the lead of the legendary Henry V, resumed the fighting amid the failure of negotiations with the French, and launched an invasion of northern France. During this campaign, the already outnumbered English lost countless soldiers to disease, causing their numerical inferiority to continue to grow day by day. Due to these dire circumstances, the English attempted to withdraw to English-held Calais, but found their path blocked by a considerably larger French army. With their backs against the wall, the English prepared for battle on the 25th of October 1415, with the gruesome Battle of Agincourt ensuing. King Henry V famously personally led his troops into battle and participated in hand-to-hand fighting, while the French king, Charles VI, sat on the sidelines far away from the battlefield as he suffered from psychotic illnesses and the associated mental incapacities. While this undoubtedly played a part in the massively outnumbered English army's eventual victory, the most important factor was by far the English and Welsh longbowmen, which decimated the French knights from the flanks, before rushing in from either side to destroy the already crippled French army once they had run out of arrows. The Battle of Agincourt is notable for being one of the bloodiest battles of the medieval era, with over 6,000 Frenchmen being killed in the slaughter compared to only around 600 Englishmen. This battle not only crushed the French and ensured English supremacy for a time, but has also become a source of pride and integral part of the national identity of both the English and the Welsh. The Battle of Trafalgar, unlike the other inclusions on this list, was a naval battle that took place on the 21st of October 1805 off Cape Trafalgar in southwestern Spain. By the time of this battle, Napoleon's rampage across Europe was in full swing, and as part of his plan to launch an invasion of the UK, he ordered that the French and Spanish fleets combined in order to take control of the English Channel and provide the French armies safe passage to the southern shores of England. In response to this threat, the English sent 27 warships under the command of Lord Horatio Nelson in the hopes of nipping this threat in the bud and ensuring they never gained naval supremacy over the English Channel. These massive fleets inevitably met around midday on the 21st of October 1805, and the most famous naval battle of all time quickly ensued. In response to being outnumbered 27 warships to 33, which included the largest warship in either fleet, the Spanish Centésima Trinidad, sorry if I butchered that, Nelson sailed his fleet directly at the Franco-Spanish line's flank, hoping to break the line into pieces. the Franco-Spanish Armada's commander, Pierre-Charles Villeneuve, had worried Nelson might attempt this tactic, but for various reasons had made no plans for this eventuality. This inaction resulted in the plan working almost perfectly, with Nelson's column splitting the Franco-Spanish fleet in three, isolating the rear half from Villeneuve's flag aboard Bucentaure. This resulted in some panic amongst the Allied vanguard, resulting in them sailing off while attempting to turn around, which gave the British temporary superiority over the remainder of their fleet. In the ensuing fierce battle, the Franco-Spanish fleet lost 20 ships, while the British incredibly lost none. Despite the lack of lost ships, the British still suffered quite heavy losses, as this tactic exposed the leading ships in the British lines to intense fire from multiple ships as they approached the Franco-Spanish lines. Nelson's own HMS Victory led the front column and was almost knocked out of the action, with Nelson himself being shot by a French musketeer during the ferocious battle, dying shortly before its conclusion. When the battle was all said and done, nearly 5,000 Allied soldiers had been killed, on top of the 20 ships lost, compared to the roughly 500 British sailors killed with no ships lost. On top of preventing a French invasion of the UK, this battle also confirmed British naval supremacy over the entire world, which would become so important in the years to come, and actually leads me perfectly into the next battle on this list. Similarly to the Battle of Trafalgar, as I'm sure most of you know, the Battle of Britain was not a land conflict and was instead fought in the skies over southern England and the English Channel. In order to understand the importance of the Battle of Britain, we first need to recap the backdrop it occurred against. At the time of the beginning of the Battle of Britain on the 10th of July 1940, Britain was essentially alone. At least on the European continent, we shouldn't forget about their colonial allies such as my homeland of Australia. Following the fall of France, the war in Europe was looking particularly bleak. With the Germans, also, yes, I know, not all the Germans were ... but I don't want this video to get demonetized, so I'll just refer to them as Germans for this video. Anyways, the Germans at this point were attempting to emphasize the bleakness of Britain's situation as much as possible, in order to force a British surrender so they could focus on the Soviet Union and their mainland European pursuits. When the British still refused to surrender, however, the Germans launched Operation Sea Lion, which was a last resort combined naval air invasion of the UK to knock the British out of the war for good. But how would the Germans do this in face of overwhelming British naval superiority? Well, the commanders decided that Germany would first need to gain air supremacy over the English Channel and southern England, and that is where the Battle of Britain began. In July 1940, the air and sea blockade began, with the Luftwaffe, or the German Air Force, mainly targeting coastal shipping convoys as well as ports and shipping centres such as Portsmouth. A month later though, on the 1st of August, the Luftwaffe was further directed to achieve air superiority over the RAF, with the aim of incapacitating RAF Fighter Command and potentially laying the groundwork for an invasion of the UK. 12 days after that, the Luftwaffe then shifted their attacks again to RAF airfields and infrastructure, seemingly in an attempt to cripple the RAF. In spite of these relentless attacks, the RAF and the British people held firm and resisted the 1B invaders at all costs. It is worth noting here that despite the RAF obviously being a predominantly British organisation, during this battle about 20% of the pilots, or 595 out of the 2,936 who took place in the Battle of Britain, were from non-British countries, including 145 Poles who were renowned for their skill, 127 New Zealanders, 112 Canadians, 88 Czechoslovaks, 32 Australians, of which 24 were killed in the battle, 28 Belgians, 25 South Africans, of which 17 were killed, 13 Frenchmen, 10 Irishmen, 9 Americans, 3 Southern Rhodesians, as well as individuals from Jamaica, Barbados, and Newfoundland. In no small part due to the sacrifices and contributions of all these nations, the RAF eventually managed to repel the Luftwaffe and secured air superiority over the English Channel, ensuring that no invasion of the UK would be able to take place for a very long time. It could be argued, as it was by Admiral Karl Dönitz of the Kriegsmarine, or German Navy, who after the war stated that air superiority was not enough, as well as the Commander-in-Chief of the Kriegsmarine Erich Raeder, who similarly doubted Germany would ever have the naval ability to invade the UK. Regardless though, if the Germans had achieved air supremacy, they could have potentially bombed the UK into oblivion, eventually leading to the British people forcing the government into an end to the war. But who knows? I'm not an alternate historian, and whatever you want to argue, the Battle of Britain was undisputedly a turning point in the war, and still remains a point of pride among the British people to this day. Now, I'm sure most of you were expecting this one, as how could the Battle of Hastings not be first on the list of the most important battles in British history? The Battle of Hastings undoubtedly drastically changed English, and by extension British history, and influenced the wars and world events to come for centuries. Now, I've already covered this battle a few times on my channel, so I'll try to keep the explanation a little bit shorter, but for those of you who don't know, the Battle of Hastings occurred on the 14th of October 1066, and was fought between the Anglo-Saxons/English, led by Harold Godwinson, who had just returned from defeating the last invading Viking force, led by Harold Hardrada in the north, and the Normans, led by the man who would eventually become known as William the Conqueror. To keep things short and simple, this conflict essentially boiled down to a succession dispute following the death of Edward the Confessor. William claimed that Harold Godwinson assured him that following the childless Edward the Confessor's death, he would allow the throne to be passed on to William. But it is worth noting that potentially the only reason Harold agreed to this, in fact if he ever did, is because William may have been holding some of his family members hostage, which kinda makes the oath moot in my opinion. Regardless, just days after the conclusion of the Battle of Stamford Bridge in the north, William landed in southern England on the 28th of September 1066, forcing Harold and his exhausted army to march all the way south in order to face this new Norman threat. The armies would ultimately end up facing off on the 14th of October 1066, with a bloody and brutal battle ensuing. The Anglo-Saxons were said to initially have had the upper hand and looked likely to win the battle. However, at some point the front ranks of the Norman army broke and began to flee, either intentionally with the hopes of encircling the pursuing Anglo-Saxons, or unintentionally due to the soldiers believing William had been killed, or just simply losing the will to continue. Regardless of the reasonings though, the result remains the same, as the Normans turned back around and encircled the pursuing Anglo-Saxons, leading to a massive slaughter and marking the beginning of the end of the battle, with Harold Godwinson's own brothers, Gurth and Leofwine, potentially being killed in this encirclement. It essentially fell apart for the Anglo-Saxons following this manoeuvre, with Harold Godwinson himself eventually catching an arrow in the eye, ultimately ending the battle for good. The importance of the Norman victory over the Anglo-Saxons for not only English history but world history cannot be overstated. This battle marked the end of Anglo-Saxon rule over England and the beginning of the Norman-French rule of England that would in a sense continue until this very day. If the Anglo-Saxons had miraculously repelled the Norman invaders, it is likely that the 100 Years' War, Wars of the Roses, the Anarchy, etc. would never have taken place and would have surely been replaced by other Anglo-Saxon conflicts. On top of this, even the language I am speaking right now would be very different had the Normans never taken power and influenced English to such a great degree. The differences in history that would have occurred had the outcome of this battle been different are truly infinite, securing this battle's place as by far the most important in English and by extension British history. Well, there we have it guys, that is the end of the video. If you would like me to do individual videos on any of these battles, I would be happy to do so, as I really enjoyed researching this one. As always, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe if you'd like to see more videos from me. But anyways, with all that said, I hope you guys have a great day, night, wherever you are, and I hope to see you in the next one.